last week, one of my friends teaches at a seminary in Dallas. A good man. Teacher of the New Testament, has written major books. Has 3 kids. One is a missionary in Siberia, one's a missionary in Russia, one's a missionary in Afghanistan. He was out jogging. He came home, lay down, and died. Not a blessed thing he could do about it. If your heart keeps beating, it's because God sanctions it. And if He ever says, "You fool, tonight your soul will be required of you," you die. Or if He ever says, "Come home, my child, now's the time, your work is done," you go. How are you going to barter with a God like that? God, I'll give you 10%. He owns you. He owns your life. He owns the whole planet. I mean, what does that mean? Lord, I'll become a missionary. Will that make me a better person? I'll become a deacon at church. No. There's only one way that you're going to have a relationship with this kind of God. And that is if He displays sovereign grace. Because He doesn't owe you anything. You and I are rebels. And we've got nothing to barter with. And the way sovereign grace, God's decision to be gracious to some people, the way that works out in the Bible is in a number of different structures. Sometimes what God does is graciously give promises of what He's going to do, so that people learn to take Him at His word, to trust His word, and look forward to what He's going to do. And sometimes God enters into formal agreements with them. Those formal agreements are called, in the Bible, covenants. And they often mirror covenants that were well known in the ancient world, so that we sometimes speak of the covenant with Abraham and the covenant with Moses and so forth. He's the God who writes His own agreements. But here again, His grace is spectacularly displayed. We come then to Genesis 12. Genesis 12. What's gone on in the intervening chapters is not particularly pretty. Abominations have multiplied until God has wiped out half the planet with a flood. Just a handful of people are spared, but the leader, Noah, promptly gets drunk. And by the preceding chapter, there is a rebellion towering through the land again, defying God. And now in chapter 12, we're told, the Lord had said to Abram, his name is later changed to Abraham, I'll keep calling him Abraham. The Lord had said to Abram, go from your country, your people, and your father's household to the land I will show you. Now he had been in a place called Ur in ancient Babylon. Then he moved to the city called Haran. And now he is being told by God to go to what would eventually become the land of Israel. And now God promises him these things. 12:2. I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse. And all peoples on earth will be blessed through you. That's a promise. Later on, the promise is further elucidated. His descendants would be as the sand of the sea. His promised son, from whom all of this would come from his old age. At this point, he's 75 years old. He's an old man. His wife is getting up there too. But nevertheless, the promise is that this child will come from the union of Abraham and Sarah, his wife. Abraham goes through periods of doubt and uncertainty. He tries to short-circuit things by sleeping with somebody else. It's a pretty messy story. But ultimately, God keeps his promise. They have this child called Isaac. Isaac eventually marries, and his wife gives birth to twins. And before the twins are born, God says to the mother, "You got twins inside you. Let me tell you, the older will serve the younger." Now, in that culture, that didn't happen. But in God's sovereignty, he chose the younger one. Before either child had done anything good or evil, just out of God's sovereign grace, he chose one above the other and predicted what would happen and preserved a certain line down through the years, generation after generation, generation after generation, until the tribes multiplied and multiplied and multiplied and eventually possessed the land. And in the midst of all of these promises, this one stands out too. And all peoples on earth will be blessed through you. This is God graciously, sovereignly promising something. But then comes not only promise, but covenant. In chapter 17, we read, "When Abram was 99 years old, the Lord appeared to him and said, 'I am God Almighty. Walk before me faithfully and be blameless. Then I will make my covenant between me and you and will greatly increase your numbers.' Abram fell face down, and God said to him, 'As for me, this is my covenant with you. You will be father of many nations. No longer will you be called Abram. Your name will be Abraham, for I have made you a father of many nations.'" There's a pun in the original. "I will make you fruitful. I will make nations of you, and kings will come from you. I will establish my covenant as an everlasting covenant." Then verse 9, God said to Abram, "As for you, you must keep my covenant, you and your descendants after you, for the generations to come. This is my covenant with you and your descendants after you, the covenant you are to keep. Every male among you shall be circumcised." Now, this is all very remarkable. Then at the end of the chapter, verse 23, we're told that on that very day, Abraham took his son Ishmael and all those born in his household, and he circumcised all of them. So here is a covenantal structure. And in between these two chapters, 12 and 17, is another chapter that speaks of the covenant, chapter 15. At the beginning of the chapter, God says, "Do not be afraid, Abram. I am your shield, your very great reward." And then at the end of the chapter, verse 12, "As the sun was setting, Abram fell into a deep sleep, and he experiences a spectacularly weird vision." The setup for it comes when Abram asks God the question in verse 8, "Sovereign Lord, how can I know that I will gain possession of all of this?" The Lord said to him, "Bring me a heifer, a goat, and a ram, each 3 years old, along with a dove and a young pigeon." Abram brought all these to him, cut them in two, and arranged the halves opposite each other. So now you've got a heifer cut in two, halves, and a ram cut in two, halves, a goat cut in two halves, one bird on one side, one on the other. Birds of prey came down on the carcasses, but Abram drove them away. And then as the sun was setting, Abram fell into a deep sleep, and a thick and dreadful darkness came over him. Then the Lord said to him, "Know for certain that for 400 years your descendants will be strangers in a country not their own. that they will be enslaved and mistreated there. But I will punish the nation they serve as slaves, and afterward they will come out with great possessions. You, however, will go to your ancestors in peace and be buried in a good old age. In the 4th generation your descendants will come back here, for the sin of the Amorites has not yet reached its full measure. And when the sun had set and darkness had fallen, a smoking fire pot with a blazing torch appeared and passed through the pieces. On that day the Lord made a covenant with Abram. What's going on? This is bizarre. When we speak today of writing our own agreements, this is not usually what has happened at the final signing ceremony. There were different kinds of covenants in the ancient world. Sometimes you had covenants between a sovereign regional superpower and small vassal states. The regional superpower, the Assyrians at some point in time, the Babylonians at other periods of time, the Hittites at other periods of time, they would arrange an agreement, a covenant. Basically, the covenant said, we will look after you, we will secure your borders, we will make sure that you are protected against enemies, and you will pay your taxes, you will show allegiance to us, and so on, so on, so on. It was an agreement between the two parties. And then there would be various curses called down. And if either side does not fulfill the terms of this covenant, then may these disgusting things happen to them. Now, obviously, it was in the power of the regional superpower to impose the nasties, not the other way around. But that's the way they were written. And sometimes one of the signs of this was to take animals, tear them apart, put them side by side with a kind of bloody alleyway between the two parts. And then the two sides of the covenant would walk between the divided animals, so as to signify, may this be done to me if I break up the covenant. May I be torn apart. May I be cut in half. So Abraham prepares the animals. But obviously God isn't a human being to walk with him between animals. He falls into a deep sleep, and in his sleep he sees a fire pot, something to represent the presence of God. But what is so stunning is that instead of the fire pot moving between the animals side by side with Abraham, so that the two of them are saying, may it be done to us if either of us ever breaks the covenant, God goes through all by himself. He takes the full responsibility for the fulfillment of the covenant all by himself. That's grace. Abraham will sin. Isaac will sometimes be a wimp, his son. The next son, Jacob, he learned some lessons on the long haul, but he is a trickster and a deceiver all the way through. He has 12 sons. One of them is sleeping with his father's concubine. Another is sleeping with his daughter-in-law. 10 of those sons can't figure out whether to murder the 11th or to sell him into slavery. And these are the patriarchs. And still God doesn't wipe them out. He's sworn in this symbolic act. They are to practice the sign of the covenant, that they are children of the covenant, so they practice circumcision generation after generation. That's fine. But then as the years go by and the moral tide swings up and the moral tide swings down, it is horrendous to see how much damage and destruction are done. And God still is forbearing and promises to keep his covenant. He will protect them. He will bring them into this land. And from their seed will come someone through whom all the nations of the earth will be blessed.